Hey everyone, welcome to today's deep dive. We're gonna be diving into some really interesting quirks of human psychology.
Okay.
So you know those times when your brain kind of takes a shortcut
Mm-hmm.
and you end up with a conclusion that's, well, let's just say a little creative.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about cognitive biases.
Yeah, those sneaky little mental patterns that can sometimes lead us astray.
Exactly. And get this. The research that we're diving into today suggests that many of these seemingly different biases, like they seem so different on the surface, might actually all stem from the same root.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a few core beliefs that we hold about ourselves and the world,
Okay.
amplified by our tendency towards confirmation bias, which we all know and love.
Right, right.
So to help us unpack this a little bit, we have a great guest expert with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
So the paper we're looking at today, it's by Oberst and Imhoff, and it really kind of digs into how these beliefs, these kind of like underlying assumptions, they can really influence how we process information, even if those beliefs aren't, entirely accurate. Or maybe they're not even based on solid evidence.
Yeah. The paper, it refers to these beliefs as like hypotheses. So these are hypotheses that we all kind of hold about how the world works.
Right.
And it's so interesting because it's not like they have to be objectively true
Okay.
or even, fully formed. It's just these kind of like assumptions that we're working off of.
So even if our beliefs are a little off base, they still kind of act as like a lens through which we see everything.
Exactly. And what's interesting too is that, a lot of times these beliefs, they don't come from some big, life-changing event or anything.
Okay.
It's really just these small everyday experiences
Interesting.
that kind of build up over time.
Mm-hmm.
We start to see these patterns, we make assumptions. And unless we're really actively questioning those assumptions,
Right.
they kind of solidify into these underlying beliefs.
Yeah.
And that then colors everything.
Yeah, it's like our brains are they're constantly trying to make sense of the world, which is, fair enough.
Of course.
But they're also kind of lazy.
Yeah.
And they want to take the shortcut.
Right.
If they can just stick with the first explanation that kind of seems to fit,
Exactly.
they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So, I'm really curious about this because I think it happens to all of us, right?
Right.
So, what are some examples of these beliefs that might be kind of secretly driving our biases?
So one of the ones that really jumps out in the research is this idea that my experience is a reasonable reference.
Okay.
Essentially what that means is that we tend to, we use our own experiences, our own perceptions as a measuring stick for how other people experience the world.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Right.
Oh my gosh. It's like, that time I cripped, walking up the stairs at a conference, like totally biffed it in front of everybody.
Oh, no.
Mortified.
Yeah.
Convinced that everyone saw and would remember it forever,
And I'm willing to bet that most people, they were just thinking about their own presentations or getting another coffee or, a million other things.
Exactly. It's so true. Or how about this one? The illusion of transparency, which I'm totally guilty of this. When you're like super nervous and you're convinced that everyone can see right through you, even if you're like trying to play it cool and you think you're appearing calm.
Like, oh, I got this. But inside.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like we tend to overestimate how obvious our internal states are to other people. And I think it's because we are so aware of how we're feeling in those moments. We assume that it must be like we must be broadcasting it.
Right. Like a neon sign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Blaring for everyone to see.
Which it makes me think of that saying, you wouldn't worry so much about what other people think of you if you realized how seldom they do.
Right.
Because we're using ourselves as the reference point. So we assume that everybody is focused on us as much as we are focused on ourselves.
Right. And this self as reference bias, it can really play out in all sorts of ways. And again, a lot of times we don't even realize it's happening.
Wow.
So, for example, think about, the last time you felt really strongly about a particular issue.
Okay.
Right. You probably had a whole internal dialogue in your head about why you were right and justifying your stance.
Yeah.
But did you actually stop and genuinely consider the opposing viewpoint with the same level of scrutiny?
Okay, that's a really good point.
It's easy to get caught in our own heads.
It is. It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking, well, because I believe something.
It must be right.
It must be the most logical, well-reasoned perspective.
Right, exactly. And that kind of leads us to another really interesting bias. The false consensus effect.
Ooh, tell me more about this one.
Okay, so It's this tendency to overestimate how many other people agree with us.
Okay.
Because we see the world through our own beliefs and experiences.
Okay.
And a lot of times we don't realize we're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
but we kind of project that onto other people.
Okay.
We just sort of assume that they see things the same way we do.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, it's like when you're like shocked by the results of an election
That's right.
or a poll and you're like, "Wait, but everyone I know thought this way."
Right. It's like we kind of create these little echo chambers for ourselves.
Totally.
We surround ourselves with people who already agree with us.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like it just reinforces that belief that we're in the majority,
It's so true.
even when maybe we're not.
Yeah, and it's funny how that ties back to that whole my experience is a reasonable reference idea, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like we're letting our own limited experience kind of dictate how we think everyone else sees the world.
Right. And it can make us blind to, the vast spectrum of opinions and perspectives that are actually out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, the world is a big and diverse place.
Right.
And just because we haven't encountered a particular viewpoint doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
It's a really good reminder that even when we feel certain that we've got it all figured out,
Yeah.
we probably don't.
We probably don't have the full picture.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've talked about a couple of these underlying beliefs that can
Yeah.
lead to biases.
Mhm.
What are some others? What else is going on in there?
So another big one that the paper highlights is this belief that I make correct assessments of the world.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense on a certain level, right?
Right.
Like, we have to trust our own judgment to some extent.
Of course.
Otherwise, we'd be paralyzed.
Exactly. We wouldn't be able to function.
Right, exactly.
But, like with anything, there can be too much of a good thing.
Right.
And I think this is one of those areas where that belief that we're generally right about things, it can be really helpful in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also lead to some pretty stubborn biases.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, think about the bias blind spot.
The bias blind spot.
Yeah, so this is the idea that, we're all really good at spotting biases in other people.
Oh, totally. Like that friend who always thinks their favorite sports team is the best no matter what.
Exactly. Or, that relative who shares, like, the most obviously biased news articles on social media.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's so frustrating.
Right. It's like we can see their biases so clearly,
So clearly.
and yet we're often completely oblivious to our own bias.
Oh, wow.
It's like we have this blind spot when it comes to our own biases.
So we do.
We assume that we're being objective and rational, even when we're falling prey to the exact same biases that we so easily recognize in other people.
We're all guilty of it, right? It's just so much easier to see the flaws in someone else's logic than in our own.
It is. It's definitely easier.
Yeah, oh, that's so interesting.
And here's where it gets even more interesting, okay?
Okay.
So this belief that I make correct assessments, it can also fuel something called the hostile media bias.
Hostile media bias. What's that?
Have you ever read a news article or watched a news report about a topic that you feel really strongly about,
Sure. Yeah.
only to come away from it feeling like the coverage was totally biased against your viewpoint?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. It's like they just didn't get it, even though to me the facts were clearly on my side.
Exactly. That's the hostile
Yeah.
media bias in action. Instead of considering that maybe, just maybe, there are some other valid perspectives out there.
Right.
We
Right.
just assume that anything that contradicts our view, it must be biased.
Yeah, it's like that belief I make correct assessments kicks in and
Right.
it's like it puts on blinders almost
No.
and we don't even consider the possibility that hey, maybe we're the ones who are a little bit off here.
It's so much easier to just dismiss something as fake news
Oh, yeah.
than to really engage with it, and actually think about it.
It's true.
And maybe even, be willing to adjust our own thinking a little bit.
Oh, it's hard work.
It is. It's much easier to stick with what we already believe.
Yeah, totally, totally.
But, what I think is so fascinating about this research is it really highlights how there's this common thread running through all these different biases.
Right.
Whether it's the spotlight effect, the false consensus effect, the hostile media bias.
These seem so different on the surface.
They do. They really do.
But you're right. There is that underlying.
It all comes back to this small set of fundamental beliefs that we have
Right.
and our natural tendency to just seek out information that confirms what we already believe.
It's like our brains are like confirmation-seeking machines.
Yes. They're constantly looking for evidence to support what we already think.
And it's not even like, it's not always a conscious thing, right?
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
like, it's happening under the surface.
Exactly. And it's not even necessarily about being, like, deliberately closed-minded.
Right.
I think we all want to believe that we're rational and objective thinkers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the thing is, these biases, they operate on a subconscious level.
Okay.
They're shaping our perceptions without us even realizing it.
So knowing all of this, like, is there any hope for us?
That's the good news.
Yeah.
There is.
Okay.
The paper really emphasizes that simply becoming aware of these biases is a huge first step toward counteracting them.
Interesting.
Like just having these mental models in mind.
Okay.
It can help us catch ourselves when we're starting to fall into those familiar thought traps.
So just being aware of it can actually make a difference.
It can make a huge difference.
Wow.
Because then we can start to, question our own assumptions a little bit more.
Right.
And be more open to different perspectives.
Okay, so awareness is key. Got it.
Awareness is key.
What else can we do? Like, how can we actually become more objective and open-minded?
So one strategy that the paper suggests, it's actually really simple, but it's incredibly powerful.
Okay.
And that is to consider the opposite.
Consider the opposite, okay?
Yeah. So instead of instinctively looking for information that confirms what you already believe.
Right, which is what we all do naturally.
Which is what we all do naturally, exactly.
Yeah.
Actively seek out information that challenges your beliefs.
Okay, so almost like go out of your way to find the other side of the argument.
Exactly. And you might not change your mind,
Right.
but at least you'll gain a more nuanced understanding of the issue.
I love that it's like that saying, if you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right, exactly.
Like, we need to surround ourselves with different perspectives even, and maybe especially the ones that make us a little bit uncomfortable.
Exactly, because that's how we grow.
That's how we grow. That's so true.
It's about approaching the world with a sense of curiosity
Yes.
and humility.
Yeah. Humility. I love that.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers
You never do.
and that sometimes being wrong is actually a good thing.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to learn.
Exactly. It's a springboard for learning and growth.
This has been honestly so eye-opening.
It's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
It really is. I feel like I need to go back and re-listen to this whole episode with these new mental models in mind.
Right. It really makes you think.
It really does. It really does.
And it can be a little bit humbling too.
For sure.
To realize how much our own biases might be shaping our view of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also really empowering.
Okay.
Because once we're aware of these biases, we can start to do something about them.
That's a great point to end on, I think, It's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
We have the power to kind of shape our own thinking.
Exactly.
Become more aware of our biases.
And hopefully become a little bit more objective in the process.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and diving into this research with me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I always love a good deep dive into the human mind.
Me too. Me too. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive as well.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this has given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to do a little bit of your own bias busting.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.